Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall, DDS, Calder Financial Group, Grand Management, Rydan Investments, JH Realty Partners, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm.
Stay informed and stay vigilant. Happy you could join us on National Vanilla Cupcake Day. I didn't have a lot of good choices. Mom's not pleased with that choice. Aaron is on the board, and he's going to be on the mic because this is part of the reason I went to the new format here. We've got we're still going to cover some football on this show, but we're going to primarily do it on the Extra Points show with football expert and 15-year NFL player and Pro Bowler Shane Graham. So we're moving some of the football coverage over there, but we'll still have some because Aaron's a football coach and we'll be talking some football. But I'm curious, Aaron, do you like cupcakes, and what's your favorite flavor if you do like a cupcake?
Oh man, that's tough. I probably could go with, sounds weird, like chocolate, like a chocolate cupcake, but vanilla frosting. I'm the same way with regular cake too.
Okay, I can see that. I like the cream cheese frosting. Like if you take a chocolate and then you put the cream cheese frosting, that's the combo. Yeah, I could do without the vanilla because as my mom made her face, she likes red velvet and she likes the salted cupcake. I was talking about that the other day. That I don't know if you've ever been to that place. It's on 32nd, but
man, I want to see. Yeah, I think I have actually.
It's a good place. Yeah, her and my girlfriend both like that place. I figured out the other day. So, yeah, she's a fan of that too. So, but anyway, so want to get Aaron involved. Want to talk about because we got good stuff coming up. We've got Chris Solari of the Detroit Free Press. We've got some Red Wings coverage with Devin Little, the Hockey Writers, and the Flying Octopus Pod. And then later we've got Sean Murphy of the From Half Court Pod to talk about the Pistons. And those situations are primarily going well, all of those. But since, we got to bridge the football coverage a little bit. Aaron, you and I did a little bit of a Vikings preview on your last show. Obviously, that Vikings game didn't go great.
Nah, not at all.
we already covered that some on the other show, but I was curious if you had any takes. We were kind of talking about how the reinforcements did come back for the Vikings. They did hold up. That you're talking about kind of adding in some packages and stuff. The offensive line did hold up a lot better for the Vikings, and then on the other side, it didn't really hold up great for the Lions. And then that led to the big news this week is it led to a change in the play calling here. And Dan Campbell, I think a lot of people forget that Campbell called the plays before he put Ben Johnson in that role. He actually called the plays, and then I think Ben Johnson got a good feel for how Dan Campbell liked to see the game called and played, and I think he took his lead. And not that he didn't build on that or improve that or he didn't become a great play caller himself, but I think he learned from him. So I think Campbell seeing that because he's underrated as a football mind. We've talked about this on other episodes, but he's underrated. I think since he's tough, he can't be tough and smart. He can't be two things in this modern day, it seems. So I'm curious what you thought of kind of the Vikings game. We kind of hit a low now against the Commanders. They were having a lot of injuries, and obviously they were having some trouble, but it was still a big victory and a big win, and the offense looked a lot smoother against that Washington team that seems to be kind of falling apart here.
Yeah, at least with the Vikings. I will say, being a Michigan fan too, so I'm like, with J.J. McCarthy at least playing a pretty good game since he's been back, I'm like, my heart's torn because the Lions lost, but it's good to see J.J. McCarthy do his thing, though, too. So and they held up against the Lions, and it was good for them. And then I think as far as like the switch and from the going against the Commanders with Dan Campbell, and that is true, though, too. It's kind of hard looking at Dan Campbell wearing the glasses while he's on the sideline with the play sheet because it's like, it is true. You can't really necessarily always play the tough guy role and be the kind of the brains guy. But Dan Campbell's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. And obviously you could see the OC, he was up in the booth with the headset too. So I'm sure it was more of a collaboration effort. more than, what everyone was seeing out there on the field, because obviously Dan Campbell's the one out there on the sideline. But I felt like, it kind of sucks seeing that, though, too, from an OC, because you kind of feel like then you don't have faith in him, and I don't think it necessarily was that. And he preached that in his post-game interview, too. That's, just how he is.
He sourced a lot of information from all the coaches, as he referenced. He got information from Morton and probably Shaw on the passing game, because they both are kind of their expertise is more on that side of things. But then I know he got Scotty Montgomery involved too, and so I think he was soliciting a lot of input. But he clearly does have a good feel for game flow. He knows how to call a good game, as far as like he's got a good feel for football and what should come next. I don't know if you saw the video, but there's a video of him calling that crossing route where Jameson Williams had the touchdown and then flipped. I can't have the flip, makes me nervous every time he flips into the end zone. But I'm okay with the celebration. This isn't an anti-celebration take. I just worry that he landed with his hand first on that. I worry, as somebody that has an extensive injury history myself. But anyway, that's not what this is about. He called that play, and he like fist pumped after he called the play, like, hey, this is the play. And then lo and behold, they scored a touchdown from just inside the red zone there.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it too, and like I said, I think a lot of it is a collaborative effort, but I think being able to have multiple coaches, and like I said, it's different. I'm speaking from like my own experience too, because at least with the varsity games and stuff too, our offensive coordinators up in the booth, but we do have coaches on the sideline. I'm also up in the booth with the OC, so we kind of look at specific things. We do have coaches that'll look, hey, how's their front looking? Are they odd, even front, or are they shaded to? And then you're also looking at like linebackers, or how often are they blitzing? Is there a tell on when they blitz? And then just kind of even in, may have a coach that looks at secondaries. There's somebody cheating up, or they shown any tendencies, and then you kind of just go off of that. And I think that kind of helps him out, and I think that eventually helped Dan Campbell kind of like, all right, this is what happened, this is what happening, and now we can, call this play because of this, kind of having an answer to what they're doing.
I think you make a great point about that, because I thought the next step may be Morton going down to the sidelines to see what it's like calling a game down there, because he's basically exclusively called the game from the booth. But you make a great point that there are benefits to both those angles. So if you have guys with input from both of those angles talking to each other throughout the game, where Campbell knows what he can and can't see from that angle. He's watched enough football, even though he's not up in the booth very often. Obviously, he's not up in the box, but he knows from the sideline versus kind of the all 22 angle that Morton has, that he has a different view. So the idea that they can talk to each other and see different things, I think that's a better play than just having one or the other. Why not have the benefit of all of the angles that you have during the game? That's why people watch all 22 coverage after the game, if they're actually studying the game, because it's harder to see it from either a certain angle on a sideline or a certain angle on a camera shot.
Yeah, and that was the other thing too, because even because I call the plays for JV, and I could see the benefit though too as as a play caller, and most play callers are usually up in the booth. I think it's a lot easier seeing the angles from up there, because there's sometimes too when we're on offense and I have to move down to one side away from everybody else just to see the defensive front, whether they're D tackles or they lined up in the A gap or the B gap, and then kind of just calling plays based off. And then sometimes you can't really see that when you're on the sideline. So having to do that was kind of annoying, but at least then when you had someone in the booth, it'd be like, hey, this is what they're doing versus this formation, and then it's easier to kind of dissect what they're going to do and then have a play built after it.
Right, and that's what we're talking about with the game flow part of it. Since Campbell's so big on that, I feel like that will help. So yeah, it's good to see, and I think people are comparing it kind of to the Anthony Lynn thing, and it's not the same as when he replaced him. I think that was more of a differences thing. I think he still wants Morton to be part of the build of everything. I just think Campbell knew that, hey, it's a lot to manage this team properly, so I can't give up call the game and manage the team the way I want to if I'm the head coach. That's the reason for the coordinator. But the switch clearly helped, and now they're kind of rolling. So hopefully it's a one game sample. But I do like how they come back from losses, and they are very resolute in a game after a loss. They usually are fairly successful in a game after that. So you realize there was need for a change, and now you've got a lot of reinforcements coming too.
Yeah, and I think that as far as they're very proactive in, hey, if this isn't working, we got to change it up. And I think that's kind of the, what's the saying? So if you do the same thing over and over again,
definition of insanity. Yeah.
And expecting a different result. So I think honestly what they did was probably in the best interest of what they did, and clearly worked.
And hopefully that can lead to some good things here for the next games and the games going forward, because they have Philadelphia, who will play in an hour or so against Green Bay. So that's good that one of those teams are going to get a loss here. But they'll play Philadelphia, which will be a big game in the NFC hunt here next week on Sunday night. But wanted to talk to you a little bit too, because Aaron's over at Godwin Heights, and unfortunately we had a local legendary football player, Marshawn Nealand, who went there and then went to Western Michigan. He's been interviewed on the station by our other sports host, Steve Project, on the Sports Project, and unfortunately we lost him way too soon. He's 24 years old, good talent. He was kind of starting to take off a little bit, getting more playing time with the Cowboys, and I know you had some interaction with him, so I just kind of want to get your take, because it's sad when we lose somebody at all, but that early. He was a very young man.
Yeah, and I think it was just tough. Yeah, I've had a few interactions with him. He went to actually one of our JV games out in Belding last year, so he got a chance to talk to the team and stuff too. And he's we all looked up to him, And I think he's like, anytime we reference this is where you could be, And I think, especially a guy, I feel like we just had so much talent, and having something that somebody to look up to. He was that for us, for a lot of our players. A lot of our players knew him. And then, he had his camp 2 years ago. And just like he's a hometown hero for us. So it was kind of shocking. At least because you can never tell, I think he, was always a happy guy. There was nothing that you could ever suspect that this was gonna happen. And like I said, I didn't know him that personally. I know his mother passed away not too long ago. So I wonder if a lot of that took a toll on him too. But, I think the biggest thing we can kind of, learn from this is, reach out to people. Mm-hmm. If something's going wrong, you got to be able to talk to somebody. And he'd had plenty of support. He's, our head varsity coach, Brandon Kimball, knew him pretty well and was kind of like a father figure to him. So it was kind of, wishing that, I'm sure he, we all kind of think, if he just reached out, I feel like, this wouldn't have been what it was.
And that goes both ways. I think that's the best thing to take away from it is reach out, but both ways too. If you feel like somebody in your network or a friend or a family member is struggling, then reach out, check in, see how they're doing, because that can mean the difference. I've been in situations like that where I've reached out to people and it's made a difference when they were dealing with a mental health crisis. And I'm nobody special. It's just the idea that you're reaching out and telling people that you care, that could stop this kind of stuff from happening. Thankfully, we have Eric Kramer coming back on later in the year here to talk about some of the mental health stuff he's doing because of his issues and his suicide attempt, and now he's forming mental health organizations and trying to help young kids with that. And I went to a dinner that he hosted that was all about that. So it's nice that they're trying to destigmatize this and understand that, hey, you can be a big, tough football player like Marshawn was and be a tough guy but still be struggling with mental stuff. So we feel for his family and the community of Godwin, and hopefully all we can take away is doing what we can for our circles and try to stop things like this from happening again.
Yeah, and that was kind of the biggest thing. So like as far as like coaches go, we go through like training stuff as far as like, one of the biggest things they talked about was mental health, especially when you see it in kids. And I've I mean, obviously I won't name names. I had a few kids that I coached this year too, where it was just they show up to practice and you knew something was off. And I think the biggest thing is understanding that, football, I mean, obviously we ask a lot from these kids. And I think be able to have that open communication, and I'm sure, the head JV coach Connor would say the same thing too. It's like, hey, feel free to reach out to us. It doesn't have to be about football. And I know a lot of these kids are probably going through stuff that, we never dealt with. And I think that's just kind of the biggest thing is, especially when it comes, I mean, in all sports, but I felt like just in football in general, that it's more than just, a team, it's a family.
That's one of the benefits of sports is it's a community, it's a family, and it's something you can lean on and you can entrust those people with those kinds of things and your struggles and everything. So yeah, I think it's good to highlight, and I think his family would want some benefit to come out of it. So yeah, it was good to talk about. Local legend lost too soon here, but we're gonna switch our attention here to Michigan State football and basketball. We're going to have Chris Solari come on after the break, and he's going to update us on the coaching situation at Michigan State on the football side and the start of the basketball season. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest here. He's a friend of the show, and on the show he's known as C. Solari, but to the Michigan State faithful, he's known as Chris Solari, and he does a great job of covering the beat market there. He's done it for many years, and as you probably know by now, Chris, we follow the national thing of the day, and the national thing that we picked is Vanilla Cupcake Day. So I'm curious I don't know if I take you for a cupcake guy. Do you eat cupcakes? And do you have a favorite cupcake, if so?
I do eat cupcakes when presented with an opportunity, and it's not something I'll go out of my way for, but, I don't turn them down when I see it. I would say I do enjoy myself a vanilla cupcake. It depends on the type. We did not do a wedding cake. We actually did cupcakes for our wedding, and the place where we got them, they were fantastic. That's a high bar for any cupcake to follow.
I feel like that's a better option to do the cupcakes rather than the cake. I think the cake gets a little overwhelming at a wedding, so I feel like the cupcakes are a better option there. So now, what do they have in the press box? Because the press box food always interests me when I talk to you guys, talk to the different writers that we have on the show. Are there cupcakes up there? What's some of your favorite food up there?
There's barely anything. They give you a voucher for maybe a hot dog and a bratwurst. Occasionally they have, this year they've added a couple more items like a pulled pork sandwich that, I'd rather get the hot dog or bratwurst, and that's not saying much. So it's, and a lot of times people, many years ago, the Michigan State used to have one of the best in the Big Ten because they would partner with all the food groups. And when I say food groups, I'm not talking like, the types of food. I'm talking about like the Apple Commission and the Michigan Poultry Commission. And, they would work together and cater and promote the independent food licensing organization. So that's gone by the wayside many years ago. So now it's just a couple hot dogs and bratwurst just to kind of get you through, sometimes a 12-hour day.
I know that Jay Batt was trying to improve the concessions. It sounds like he's got to work on that too. He's got to extend up to the press box.
And I think they're having some issues with that as a whole right now. And I've heard from a lot of people that the concessions have not taken an uptick like they had thought. And that, I believe that was underway before Jay Batt took over. So I don't think he can be. I know he is looking into that and trying to enhance that. But as of right now, I know a lot of people, Michigan State fans, have been frustrated for a number of different reasons with the in-game experience with football. So something that they've been trying to work on and improve. So we'll see how it works out in the first few years of Batt's tenure.
I'm kind of saying that tongue in cheek too, because he's got some other things on his mind. I think Mr. Bat does. So, and one of those that you're alluding to, Chris, is obviously the football season has not gone to plan, and I'm curious to get your takes. I've read some of your articles. I thought you wrote a great article about kind of the totality of what would happen if you were to replace Jonathan Smith, and that there's more to it than kind of meets the eye, the fans saying, oh, well, this isn't good enough, get rid of him. Because one of the things that I have thought of with this, because I'm an Indiana guy, we're having an incredible year that I still can't understand.
2 years.
Yeah, 2 years. And I can't, I still don't understand. It doesn't compute in my head that the team in the crimson and cream is running around and has higher scores. It just doesn't work for me because I'm too used to other Indiana traditions. But with Michigan State, I think of them as kind of positioned ahead of Indiana most of the time, not these last couple years, but they have a good tradition. But I think you did a good job of highlighting the fact that Smith isn't that far off the pace of what they've been doing. I think they kind of struggle, like a lot of teams do, with legacy and what their team should actually be able to get as far as a coach, what they're in the market for. Indiana basketball is guilty of this all the time. They always think they're going to hire the top. Okay, we have a coaching vacancy. Let's go hire Brad Stevens when he was already coaching the Celtics. No, he's not going to go to the Hoosiers and take that job. And so the fan base can be unreasonable about these things, but I don't really know where to put Michigan State. So I thought you did a good job of that because they've had good seasons. They had obviously the Saban run earlier. They had the D'Antonio run where there were some good seasons in there. You talked about the Kenneth Walker season, but I'm curious kind of how you go about that and where you stand on the season so far, because I think Smith is a good coach and can be a good coach, but there's obviously some things that aren't clicking right now this year.
Yeah, I mean, listen, even with D'Antonio, the final few years of D'Antonio were basically 500 football. And quite honestly, the last few years, even after he made the playoffs, where he had the 3-9 year where the 1 year that he didn't make a bowl game, and then they had a nice bounce back year, but then they were 500 the rest of the final 2 years in 18 and 19. And, there are 57 and 59 since making the college football playoff in 2015, and 34 and 51 in the Big Ten. And that's with 2 years and 17 and then 21 again, where they were competing for a division title to go and play in Indianapolis and didn't make it. So they had a couple blips in there. And, I think what it does, first of all, it shows the incredible job that Mark D'Antonio did from about 2000, well, actually really when he took over in 2007 all the way through that 2015 season and even the 17 season. He made Michigan State, much like Tom Izzo did in basketball, a consistent winner. It was something that really few thought would be possible post Duffy Daugherty. I mean, it has not happened. When Daugherty, even the end of Daugherty's tenure, I wrote about this towards the end of D'Antonio's tenure, he began to slip. He began to slip quite a bit after that 66 national title run. And, 67 was rough, all the way up till he retired in 72, I believe. And Denny Stoles came in, they hit with probation. Darryl Rogers came in and kind of took it over and righted it for a little bit and then left for Arizona State, which, people outside of the Michigan State sphere sometimes find the Michigan State sphere a little bit, I don't want to say cumbersome, but it's a difficult sphere to navigate. Politically and internally, it's a different ecosystem than a lot of people from outside of it are used to. I think that's why you see many of the hires, whether it be athletic directors, whether it be football coaches, have had some sort of experience within the ecosystem. And then Muddy Waters struggled. George Perlos came in, righted the ship, and he got, eventually that fell apart. And Nick Saban, remember Nick Saban wasn't Nick Saban, right? I mean, he had been here as a defensive coordinator under Perlos, and when he came back, he had 500 seasons. I mean, he had some struggles up until that 99 season when they went 11-2, and then he left for LSU. But even the year before that, he had probably about as much talent the previous year, and they were about a 500 team. The team that beat Ohio State on the road in Columbus when it was number one. It was probably John Cooper's best team. So if you take it, you have to take a big picture look at who exactly you are if you're Michigan State. And I think that's the first step to deciding, okay, can Jonathan Smith get us beyond where we have normally been, or do we really need to go out and make a different hire? I mean, it's going to be a fascinating thing for a new AD who does not have that experience, a new president who does not have that internal experience, and navigating a donor base that, quite frankly, set Jonathan Smith up to fail from the beginning.
Those are all interesting points, because I was thinking of some of those, especially the donor base piece. I know they lost one of the bigger donors here in the last year or two, and I'm sure there's other people contributing, but I know that was one of the things that one of the selling points on BAT coming in and being able to mobilize that, work the NIL side of things, and that's ever changing. But that's kind of the math that I have a hard time computing nowadays too, because I was always under the impression and under the mindset that if you hired a coach, especially in college football, that you had to at least give them through a full cycle of recruiting to see what they were made of. You got to hire them, and then they've got to bring in that freshman class, and then that freshman class has to become seniors, and you've got to have all of their recruits in there. And obviously recruiting starts way before, as you know better than I do, way before that junior year time frame now, but at least have their guys where they're working the system, and it's based within their offense, defense, their schemes, what have you. But now NIL and the transfer portal have kind of made a lot of things a bit muddy, but it makes that muddy too, because a guy like Curt Cignetti, to go back to Indiana, can come in and pull all his guys from James Madison of all places, and then turn a program that's never historically been very good into a college football playoff team, and now into an undefeated team, and get better guys through the transfer portal the next year. And so I don't even know how to compute that, because the guys still need time to put all of this stuff in place and get their schemes and get the right players for their schemes. But with the ways to acquire them from season to season and get veterans, quote unquote, in the college football scene, I don't even know how much time we're supposed to give somebody.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the better question is, how much money are these donors
exactly
to give the coaches? Because that's ultimately what it comes down to. I mean, this last cycle, I believe, was the last real, and by real, I mean it was a real short window for what this extravagant NIL and NIL collectives had done. And you saw it at Michigan with Bryce Underwood, the money that they gave him before it all got contracted and constricted now with the new rules and the College Sports Commission, and basically schools being told to go away from the collectives and all of that. I mean, that's, you're seeing Michigan State try and create something different to bring in the donors internally and then distribute the money that way. I mean, it's really the Wild West. I mean, nobody knows. And I mean, I think athletic directors are also trying to navigate that whole idea. Do you want to be a school that continues to hire and fire people? Do you want to be a school that is just a stop off on the way of free agency in college sports? Because that's not a healthy thing and a healthy system for anybody, whether it be the athletes and the students, whether it be for the coaches, and really, quite honestly, for the fans and the program itself. I mean, if you have constant movement like this, whether it be coaches, whether it be players, I mean, you don't want to be a stopgap. You want to be a destination. And so how do you do that? I think that's the question that Jay Batt and really Kevin Guskowitz, the university president, have to answer when they're trying to shape what Michigan State's identity and role is as a football program. I think Tom Izzo's program is pretty well established after 31 years, right? And it kind of sets a benchmark. And I think when Alan Haller hired Jonathan Smith, he was looking at that as someone who was a program builder who could take a long-term view and approach to bring Michigan State back to where Mark D'Antonio had it. But the game has changed. I mean, the game has changed because of all the money that's being thrown around by donors. And, that's where I have another big question, I think, in all of this. Who's running the ship? Is it the donors? Is it the athletic department? Is it the athletic director? Is it the board of trustees or regents? I mean, nobody really knows at this point. But I do think that a solid leadership within the university structure has to kind of navigate that and, be able to play the sides, but also be firm that this is a university decision. This is not a donor decision.
Well, appropriately for Michigan State, it's very muddy waters in the modern day of college football and NIL and everything. And you hit on kind of what my next question was going to be and basically answered it, which was about kind of the math of it and talking about the donors and the idea that if you do fire Jonathan Smith, then you've got to worry about the buyout piece, and you cover that in your great piece recently. And so, yeah, there's so many things that it's hard to pull a string and kind of not end up with a knot in all of this. But
well, and the other component too is which direction. Let's say they were to get rid of him, and you would have to pay him, you would have to pay his staff their walkaway money, and then you would have to, depending on which way you went, the coach, would you go after a coach that's already seated and established somewhere else, because then you have to pay buyout money for them and their staff, or do you go after someone like a James Franklin or a Pat Fitzgerald or somebody that's outside of the profession right now, either through termination or by decision? Nudge Urban Meyer, if you want to throw that name again against the wall like some did. But the reality, I mean, then you wouldn't have to pay a buyout for them, but you still, they're going to have coaches that they want to get that you're going to have to go pay buyout numbers for. So it's, there's a lot of money. And I think the quiet part that nobody wants to really address here, that, as a fiscal leader, J-Bat has to understand that until something is adjudicated with Mel Tucker, you're still, until it is said and done, you still have that there of $80+ million that you might owe. And, whether they negotiate a buyout or not a buyout, but basically if they negotiate walkaway terms to end the lawsuit, to mitigate damage and make this whole continuing saga go away, that's one thing. So there's more money involved there. Or do they fight it out the whole way and continue to have attention, continue to get dragged through in discovery and everything else? I don't think they want to do that either. So there's a lot of components that, even to Jonathan Smith, have nothing to do with him, but everything to do with his job security.
It would be wild, in your words, to your point, to be paying walkaway money to two coaches at the same time. The last two coaches, like you said, with the Tucker situation, and then pay Smith if you do get rid of him. So it is,
and then three if you bring in a new coach who's already sitting. And quite honestly, right when Mark D'Antonio left, he took a one-time payment too. So, that's essentially, in 5 years, you're paying four coaches a lot of money.
And obviously the lack of continuity has not helped them from that side. Obviously couldn't control the Tucker situation so much, but the Smith situation is more under their control. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. And that's great stuff as usual on that discussion. So you always make too many interesting points and extend the conversation, which is great. But I want to talk a little basketball too, because we tipped off with that recently, and I want to see what you think of the team and the recent win over Arkansas. So we'll come back with Chris Solari after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Chris Solari, the Detroit Free Press, talking some Michigan State sports here. Wanted to get in at least a little basketball in our short segment here, Chris, because I like this team this year. I watched the last game. It was a good game against a tough team. They played well. The freshmen, as you highlighted in your recent article, got a lot of minutes, and that seemed to impact things. But this seems like kind of a classic Tom Izzo team to me. But I'm curious what you've seen from following them here, even though you're doing double duty here at the moment.
Yeah, it's a very blue-collar team, and I think, anytime you have a team that starts from the inside out, I think that's partly kind of going to be the ethos. I mean, I think Jackson Kohler and Carson Cooper provide maybe one of the best 1-2 big man tandems that Izzo's had in recent years. And then you add in Cohen Carr to that as well, coming from the wing and being able to drop down to the 4. But I do think that Cam Ward, the job he did against Arkansas, really shows that he's a ready-made college player. That was a second college game, and he ends up with 18 and 10, and really at times was just dominating in that game, and backing guys down and scoring off second chance, and catching passes in the paint. Cohen Carr, I thought, had a tremendous game of using his passing ability, which is something we haven't really seen a lot of. And Jordan Scott, I think, defensively really gave them some options at the 2 guard, and he was a dog on the rebounds too. I mean, they crushed Arkansas both on the glass in second chance points and in paint scoring. So those were, I think, some big time things. They've got a lot of questions though at the 2 guard, and they've got a lot of problems again shooting from the arc. I think that Trey Fort and Kurt Ting both have had their struggles one way or another, both defensively and offensively. I think Jordan Scott is, he's ideally probably more of a 3, but he's got the ability and defensive ability and length to be an impact guy at the 2, and he does have a shot. But it's a lot to put on a freshman to check at that high level. We saw that with Max Christie. Max Christie, when Izzo had him, was brought in as a very good 3-point shooter, and he turned into a defensive dynamo and a guy who was able to create some things, but his 3-point shot struggled. And he got it back when he got to the NBA. But those are some things that I think are going to be an issue. And I think Jeremy Fears has been a tremendous leader, and I think you see his court vision with this team and his leadership and his ability on the defensive end to get into guys and get into guys' heads on the other team. They do need some offense out of him. He can't go 0 for 7. He's got to be able to hit inside. He's got to be able to hit some of those floaters, hit a couple elbow jumpers, not necessarily extending it to the 3, but he's got to be able to show he can shoot from outside. Otherwise, teams are going to sag off him, and the same with Cohen Carr. So, but I do like this team, and I think it's going to be a fascinating watch this year to see how it develops and evolves.
That's the key word for me, because Izzo, as you mentioned, with Christie and numerous other players, he's a good developmental coach. He's good at getting the best out of his players, especially if they're the right fit for him and his system and his coaching style. And this team seems like, we were talking a little bit about this in the first segment, how we tend to make people one thing. And this team seems like a bunch of guys that if we made them one thing in previous years, or seeing them initially, like Cohen Carr's a high flyer, Kohler's an energy big man. But then last year we realized, oh, wait a minute, Kohler and Cooper are getting outside and shooting from the outside. Oh, Carr, like you said, has some court vision, has some feel for his game, and then hopefully that can expand to Fears, and that he can show that offensive side to go with his leadership and passing. But I think this is a good starting point for the team, and if they can make that jump, which it's a classic Izzo team with a classic Izzo schedule, that there's a murderer's row here of teams in the early going, because he always schedules tough, which affects the regular season record but often gets them tournament ready. It'll be interesting to see how they do during this upcoming non-conference schedule, because they started it out well against Arkansas, but they've got Duke and a whole host of other teams coming up here.
Yeah, and in between the Arkansas and Duke game, you have next Tuesday, you've got Kentucky at Madison Square Garden in the Champions Classic, and then you've got in Fort Myers, Florida, Thanksgiving Day, North Carolina. So this is a gauntlet schedule, and there are some, they got, I think Thursday they've got San Jose State coming in, so that's a little bit of drop in competition. So I think it's a nice wave for Izzo to kind of see things and kind of push and prod and test these kids against high-end competition, and then rein it back and try and work on some things and get some things accomplished for the next big test, which will be the Kentucky game. And then you come back and you got a couple other games, and then you got to go play North Carolina in that tournament. And next thing you know, it's going to be early December. You got Duke coming in, and then you start into Big Ten play. So it is more than just a murderer's row. But I do think that it's scheduled in such a wave fashion that it allows Izzo and his staff to really get a better gauge of the developmental needs for this team before the Big Ten play starts.
Which I think is going to be strong this year. Obviously, in-state rival Michigan is looking good so far. They've reloaded that roster and they look good. I think there's going to be a lot of strong teams this year. So it's going to be they're going to be tested again, just like last year. I was at the Big Ten tournament and it was a tough one, and they sent everybody through the paces, but that's the Big Ten now, especially with the expanded format. So hopefully Izzo's scheduling will get them ready for Big Ten play, and then hopefully tournament play, both the Big Ten tournament and then NCAA tournament eventually.
Yeah, that's his usual MO.
Yeah, he's been doing it for a long time, and it clearly works. And his players get battle tested, and there's something to that you've been in those key games, and then down the stretch you can get a guy like Jace Richardson developing last year. So hopefully that something like that can happen this year. But we appreciate you joining the show. I know we got to get you out of here, but we're glad you could join us and chat some football and basketball, and hopefully we'll have you back on here as both seasons progress and get your takes on everything developing here.
Sounds great, Ryan. Let's do this again soon. All right.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris. Take care.
Be well.
Talk to you soon. All right. Thanks, Chris Solari. Appreciate him joining the show here and talking some Michigan State. Both of those situations are going to be good ones to follow. Obviously, the coaching situation with the football team, but also the basketball team. We'll be keeping an eye on them on this show here, because I think that they'll be interesting to follow, as well as the Michigan Wolverines basketball team too. But we're going to turn our attention to hockey. Devin Little hasn't been on this season yet, and I'm curious about his takes he works with the hockeywriters.com and the Flying Octopus Pod. Want to get his takes on both the young Griffins and the primarily young Red Wings here. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest here, friend of the show, Devin Little, to talk a little puck. They've been in a little bit of a down swing, but I'm curious to get his takes on kind of that up and down nature that they had last year and if it'll carry over. But to kick off the show, Devin, we talked about the thing of the day is Vanilla Cupcake Day. So I'm curious if you eat cupcakes, and if you do, if you have a favorite flavor.
Catching me off guard with the cupcakes here. Yeah, I enjoy a cupcake from time to time. I guess I'll go with the basic chocolate if I have to name a favorite.
That's a good one. Yeah, well, we like to throw a little bit of a curveball at the beginning of the interview, get you off your mark, and then throw you right into hockey after that. So I'm sure I'll throw in a random comment about how they have a lot of hyphenated names on the team, or I'll make a Mighty Ducks reference. Those are all kind of like those are in the odds book for any hockey interview that I do. But I have been watching every game. I like this team. I like what's happened so far, and you have a much better mind for it because hockey's probably my least strong sport overall, which is why we get you experts on here. But it's been interesting to watch because I know you cover both. I know you're on the west side of the state here with us, and you cover the Griffins and the Wings, and it seems to me like they've kind of right-sized both teams by some of the moves that they've made, because they've reallocated a couple of the more experienced Red Wings to the Griffins, and then they pulled up some of the young talent. So it's like they're using the leadership that they had at the Wings to obviously make a good Griffin squad. They had a lot of young talent already, and I'm sure that the leadership is helping down there. And then this new blood is adding some grit and some of the things that we were needing last year in some of the interviews that we had with you and some of the other folks last year, talking about that grit and toughness. And that seems to be more of an identity of this team under the first full McClellan year. But I'm curious what you see out of both squads and how you see the year going so far here.
A professional sports team from Detroit really embodying grit as their identity. Wow, who would have seen that
right?
coming, right?
Yeah.
But no, I think that you've at least summarized it pretty well there. I think like you said, kind of a transaction of veterans going down to Grand Rapids to the AHL, and then youth coming up to the NHL. And for what it's worth, I think both the Griffins and the Red Wings are playing a fun brand of hockey. The Red Wings, obviously, I think the talk of the town is still Emmett Finney, former 7th round pick, playing on the top line with Dylan Larkin and Lucas Raymond. And then after sending Pellikka, Nate Danielson just made his NHL debut the other day as well. They're still got some things they got to tighten up. I think the record kind of shows that, but all in all, though, they're playing a more aggressive brand of hockey. They're playing a more, I would say, decisive brand of hockey. And then, like you said, there's that grittiness. They, especially early on when they kind of were racking up their 9 wins, they were finding ways to win games, even games where they didn't necessarily deserve the win. So when you're finding ways to win games that you don't necessarily deserve, I think that's the mark of a good hockey team. Hopefully they can build on that, because they're kind of on a skid right now, I'd say. And then as for the Griffins, they still have yet to lose in regulation. They technically suffered their first loss just the other night against the Chicago Wolves, but that's a fun team as well. It's crazy, all these different young guys have already kind of made a mark in Detroit, and Michael Brandt-Nygaard got sent down, but he's, by all accounts, he's going to be right back up there, if not sometime this season and definitely next season. And then there's a couple other guys that look real good in Grand Rapids too. It's all of a sudden it's almost like the Red Wings have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to this young talent. And that's what you rebuild for, right? It's been a very fun, very exciting season to see in the first month, just because of all the youth kind of coming to a head here.
Even to my untrained eye, it seemed that way last year, because you talked about kind of the grit thing and how this was maybe the last team to embody that in this cycle. The Red Wings have been gritty in previous iterations, but in this cycle they maybe lacked that a little bit. And I think the first thing I'm thinking of with what you were saying, that's the one part that I think should hopefully come, because the one thing that they don't necessarily share with the Lions, the Tigers, and even the Pistons are getting better at this here, is they are a little bit up and down. They were that way with McClellan last year, and when they hit a skid, they leaned into it pretty hard. Now they're going through a 3-game skid right now. We'll see what that continues to. Hopefully they're able to go on the upswing soon, but the other teams seem to regroup pretty well, and after a loss, they do not want to take a second loss. And obviously that can be said for every team. Nobody wants to lose twice in a row, let alone once. But there's a certain resolve that happens with some of these other teams. So I'm hoping the Wings will develop that. But obviously the goalie pairing and the improved defense and the new blood, hopefully all those elements, and McClellan being there in his first full year and getting Yanni in the mix and all of those things, I think hopefully that should help. But we'll see if they're as up and down, because they had some great win streaks last year, but they were coupled with some losing streaks with McClellan at the helm.
Oh yeah, and it seems like it doesn't matter who's the head coach, whether it's Tom McClellan, Derek Lalonde, and even Jeff Blashill a few years ago. It's kind of been a pattern where the highs are high, and for periods of time, it almost feels like they can beat anyone in the NHL, and they can compete. They could not just compete for a playoff spot, but they can contend. And then, the next week they lose a game, and then they lose another game, and suddenly they look like one of the worst teams in the league. I agree. Once they kind of figure out how to bounce back from a bad loss, how do they, even just within singular games, when things start to not go their way, it's always kind of a coin flip as to whether they're going to respond the right way or the wrong way. And I don't know, if that's it definitely seems like it's the focus of Todd McClellan and his coaching staff, trying to fix what's between the ears, as he always describes it. And it's going to be interesting to watch, because it's not a technical skill, right? To bounce back. It's very much like a mindset thing, making sure that you're not too down, and you just kind of approach every game with a clean slate. It'll be interesting to see which players are kind of the leaders, who leads the charge on that front, because I agree. That's what's setting the Red Wings apart from their other Detroit counterparts.
And I think what we're talking about with the embarrassment of riches, as you put it well, I think that will help, because they've got I think that's one of the keys to some of these other teams is the Lions do the next man up thing. They pull people up from the practice squad and then still kind of hold up, even though they've had a lot of injuries. The Tigers have had a very strong, they're probably the most similar to the Wings in that they went through some down years and then they built up their system, and that maybe came to fruition a little bit faster because of the development of certain players. But it's a similar thing where they have a wave of newer, younger guys coming with a fairly young aggregate roster at the main roster, and same with the Pistons. They have a young core, but I think that will help. That, like you said, we could see some of these guys by the end of this season, but either way the outlook looks good, where you've got a couple that were thrown in there. I want to get your take on all of the guys by the end of the interview, but Finney is obviously the main buzz name here. The fact that this is a guy that they thought would be a development piece, that would be a long-term piece, and he is a guy that's developing much faster and much better than anyone would have thought, because it's interesting to me that with the draft in hockey, that when you pick a guy in the 7th round, it's like, well, he's probably not going to make it, and let alone he makes it, and now makes it and is on one of the premier lines here and has acquitted himself nicely. I mean, he's playing like a guy that has nothing to lose here.
Oh, absolutely. I think I think it won't be long before we start to see a lot of Finney jerseys popping up as the cameras are showing on the broadcast. They're kind of showing crowd shots. I think more and more 58 jerseys are going to start popping up. That's a kid you can root for. He's really impressed me. Kind of to your point there, all of the scouting reports of him were more long-term view. I mean, even me, I was excited about him after last season in the junior level, and I kind of had my thought of, keep an eye on him this year. He's going to probably play a full year in the AHL, and then, if things go well for him, maybe he's knocking on the door for an NHL call-up. I thought there was a chance for that, to make the team at a training camp, not just to make the team, right, but to also play on the top line. I'm very much in that camp of being very surprised by this player, and to also not just make the team, not just make the top line, but look like he belongs too. I think that Emmett Finney's going to have a very long career ahead of him, because he already looks like the type of player that can play in a variety of different roles. He excels on that top line with Larkin and Raymond, because he kind of does the dirty work. He's creating space for the other two to really utilize their skill, and Finney puts himself in the right areas too. He's if Larkin gets a shot on net, you usually see him right next to the crease, ready to try to bang home that rebound. And with that that tenacity he plays with, and there's some two-way ability there too. You could also see him slide up and down the lineup. We've already seen that a little bit too, where he can maybe fill a checking role for a time too, depending on what the lineup looks like. So, he's like I said, he's an easy player to cheer for, not just because of his story, not just because of where the Red Wings took him in the draft, but he plays a fan-friendly brand of hockey. We'll say he's not afraid to muck it up, but he also is able to put up points. He's going to be a lot of fun to watch for a long time.
Which those are some of the traits that we talked about with this draft and the recent drafts, because Yzerman knows better than anybody that this is the type of thing that he needs. I'm sure even he did not think that this was going to come to fruition this early, but that's, I think, the most exciting thing about him is the fact that, like you said, he's got traits that are going to keep him there for a long time, but they're traits that are hard to teach to other people, whereas there should be skill growth in some of the other things, because he's still a very young player. Just because he hit the NHL and is in this first line and is acquitting himself nicely doesn't mean that he won't pick up a ton of skills along the way, but he's got the part that's harder to teach, that toughness, the kind of innate ability. Those things are tougher to teach to people, because you can say, hey, well, we need you to do some of the dirty work. It's easy to say, but it's harder to teach somebody to do that stuff, rather than skill development of, okay, we got to work on your shot from this level of the ice or the passing elements, whatever it is. It's harder to say, hey, well, yeah, go do the dirty work. Well, what does that mean? But he's figured it out.
And it really sends a message to the rest of the Red Wings, the rest of the prospects, everyone throughout their system. If this kid can kind of come out of nowhere and just work his way into the lineup and continue to, maintain a spot in the lineup just through pure, hard work, tenacity, and the skill he does have, it sends that message. Everybody else, if you work your butt off too, you'll end up in the lineup too, or at least you'll have a shot to end up there. It doesn't necessarily matter where you're drafted. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter, what your specific skill set is, or even what position you play. If you're willing to put in the work and you've got the talent to kind of complement that work ethic, you're going to get your opportunity, just like Emmett Finney did.
It's a great story for the team and for fans. Like you said, he's going to have many fans alike because it's a testament to the hard work element and the fact that, hey, this is the type of player we want. We want somebody that is on the grittier side. We're a Detroit sports team, etc. So it's been a fun story, and I want to talk about some of the other young guys and who we may see from the Griffins and what you think of the free agent acquisition so far. But we'll do that after the break here with Devin Little. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Devin Little of the HockeyWriters.com and the Flying Octopus Pod, giving us some good stuff on the Red Wings so far. I'm curious of a couple things here, Devin. I'm curious. I know you've obviously watched the young guys. I want a little bit of a roundup. You did a great article for the Hockey Writers, but I'm curious what you think of the free agent acquisition so far, because that's the other element of this is the young guys are coming, and that's great. But I feel like as a whole, even though there wasn't a huge marquee acquisitions in the offseason other than arguably the Gibson trade, where that was a big move and everybody was talking about that, there was a lot of lower key acquisitions in the offseason. But I think it seems like this group has done a good job overall and added some of those elements that we're talking about with Finney, at least from my assessment of it so far.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of funny. Heading into the season, a lot of talk was about what Steve Yzerman didn't do. In the offseason, there was a real hunger for a big splash one way or another, whether it was a free agent signing or a trade or whatever. Obviously, that didn't go down, but here we are. We're hopped up on rookie mania. We're very excited about the rookie talent here in Detroit. But like you said, there's also the moves that Yzerman did make, and they kind of, to some extent, are getting maybe a little overlooked and underappreciated. Mason Appleton's probably the most notable one that at least everyone will kind of quickly think of. Oh yeah, they brought him in. Appleton's kind of surprised me this season in terms of his ability to move up and down the lineup. I remember when Lucas Raymond went down for a couple games, Appleton assumed his role on the top line with Darren Larkin and Emmett Finney, and I was a little puzzled by it. But then by the end of the game, Appleton scored the game-winning goal. So I was quickly converted into all right, this guy belongs on the top line now, guy. But no, Appleton's been really good. He's been a real positive force on the penalty kill. I think just real quick in general, the penalty kill looks leap and bounds better than it did last season, which not hard to do necessarily, but you can tell that the personnel additions and just more time with the coaching staff has really benefited that special teams unit. JVR, James Van Riemsdyk, has been a nice solid presence on the fourth line. Obviously, he has a lot of size. He's a veteran. He's definitely not, the premier power forward he was a decade ago. But he's a real solid presence in that bottom six. I think that he's somebody, just the other day against Chicago, the second power play unit had a bunch of first and second year players. They had Casper, they had Finney, Sanjin Pelika, and then there's James Van Riemsdyk there as kind of like, the uncle basically, of the group there. And that kind of shows what he can do, what he brings to the group. He's solid. He can crush the net. He's a big dude. I think he's 6'3" or 6'4". So he's hard, he's hard to move, and then he can complement these young, enthusiastic forwards that just kind of need a sturdy guy to crash home and, maybe pop in a rebound from time to time. And then I guess to kind of round out the free agents there, the Red Wings did bring in a couple of right-handed defensemen, Travis Hamonic and Jacob Bernard-Docker. I think that this is an area where I know I was a little concerned heading into the season for this team, because this is where I thought the Red Wings needed to make a big move, was on defense. They didn't really add anybody on the left side. They didn't really add anybody notable on the right side. Little did I know that Axel Sending-Pellikka would be, ready to go right off the hop here. But for to their credit, I think both Bernard-Docker and Hamonic have brought what they're expected to bring to the lineup. Hamonic is he's a 35-year-old veteran of almost just over 900 games. So he's been there, he's done that. He's kind of expected to play in his own zone, block a few shots, make sure the goalie can see the puck, and then get off the ice once the puck leaves the zone. And then Bernard-Docker is kind of, he's assigned to play a similar game. I think he's been kind of an underrated pleasant surprise for me in terms of being in a free agent addition. I actually think he looks really good on that third pairing with Albert Johansson. I think that he plays a very simple game, is able to move the puck up ice and just kind of let the forwards do their thing. He doesn't overthink things. He's 25. He fits kind of the age profile of the team right now. And then if he's not working, then you have the veteran Hamonic there to kind of switch in and switch out. But like you said, overall, I think the free agents, not the most eye-popping names you could have gotten in free agency, but they're all kind of filling the role just exactly the way you'd hope they would. And it's allowed the team to really get a sense of, how they look elsewhere in the lineup. They don't have to worry about their fourth line. Now they can really, because they have Mason Appleton there and they have JVR there. Now they can really focus in on the middle six and what they can do to improve their depth there. Just these small, savvy additions to stabilize things. Sometimes that's what you need to, like I said, stabilize things before you can start building upward.
I think that's a good point in a general team building sense, because everybody wants to make the big swing, but the problem with the big swing is that's a home run swing, and these were a bunch of small additions, like you said, that were low risk and potentially not necessarily high reward, but medium reward. Whereas if they don't work out, there's really not a lot invested in them. They shouldn't mess with the culture too much or take up too much of the cap or anything like that. And I think, pretty much all of them have acquitted themselves well. I'm glad you mentioned Bernard-Docker, because I think he's not necessarily the first name out of people's mouths, but he's one that stuck out to me. He just always seems to do a solid job. The main thing that I wanted to take, you gave great information there, but were we almost going to get a rookie mania running wild brother from Devin Hulk Little? That I felt like we were close to that.
Oh, very close, very close.
I mean, just let that fly. We like a good wrestling reference on this show, so that's if you can do that in a future appearance, that would make me very happy here. That would throw me off as much as I throw you off by asking you about cupcakes and hoagies and stuff to start the interview. So that's
noted.
That's great. But no, but it's good to highlight all these free agents, because I think although the rookies have taken over and we have had rookie mania, there's been a lot of good additions from the free agency acquisitions over the summer. But I'm curious what you think. I know you did a good article about the roundup of the talent kind of around the Griffins and the minor league system. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because in September you wrote an article about the goalie pairing at the main roster, and I've been kind of focused on this part where it seems like they're trying to get a succession plan going, and now we've got to figure out who the next man up is going to be behind the two clear current incumbent starters, the 1A and 1B that they have in Gibson and Talbot. But it sounds like the goalies are playing well throughout the system, and there's a lot of other talent that's stuck out to you. So I wanted to get your feel for the talent in the Griffins and the rest of the minor league system here.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way or a good place to start, right? In goal. The good news when it comes to Red Wings goaltending Not just that they do have a 1A, 1B, or at least it seems like it in the early going here with Gibson and Talbot. They have a 1A and 1B in Grand Rapids too. Both Sebastian Kosa and Mikhail Postava have been very solid to start the season. Obviously, like I mentioned before, the Griffins had been undefeated until recently. Both Postava and Kosa have 4 wins and 4 appearances. Kosa has a shutout in there. Their save metrics are both looking real good. Postava, I guess to me, has really stood out just because he kind of came out of nowhere. He was one of those European free agents the Red Wings signed late spring, early summer. Didn't really grab headlines. No one really knew who he was. He's only a few months older than Sebastian Kosa, though, so he's still a young guy, and he looked really good over in the Czech Pro League last season, and that's kind of what grabbed the Red Wings' attention. And then he looked really good in training camp, I thought. And then in preseason, I thought he looked good when he got the opportunity. And now whenever he's getting the opportunity with the Griffins, he's still looking really good. He looks like a starter caliber goaltender, at least at the AHL level. And I think that, Kosa has still continued to build on the success that he's had at the AHL level too. He's dealing with a minor injury right now. Actually, they both are. They're dealing with minor injuries. So, obviously got to keep an eye on that, but neither of them seem like they're super big deals right now. But yeah, it's not a stretch to say that one or both of them could be pushing for playing minutes in the NHL by season end. And that'll be interesting to see, I guess, who gets these opportunities when they're there and how they fare in those opportunities. Because we talk about all the young talent that's on the Red Wings roster right now, and the one position where they don't have young talent is in goal. But they certainly have a lot of it in the system, and it just kind of seems like a matter of time before it starts to pour into Detroit. And then for what it's worth, looking beyond Grand Rapids, there's Trey Augustine, who, depending on who you ask, he's the best goalie prospect in the system, and he's looking really good for Michigan State, just like he did last season. He's going to be a very interesting topic of discussion come springtime when the Spartans are finishing up their season, and it's time for the Red Wings to decide whether or not they want to give him a contract, because he's going to want to go somewhere to play. And if Kosa and Postava are both looking really good in Grand Rapids, there's not going to be playing time in Grand Rapids for Augustine, so that'll be interesting to monitor. But that's a long time away. And then I guess kind of staying in college, I got to Michigan State with Augustine. Let's stay at the collegiate level. Prospect Max Plantz is probably the most exciting player in college hockey right now. And that's not even necessarily an exaggeration. He leads the NCAA in point production. He has 22 points in 12 games, which is almost 2 points a game, which is insane. Playing over there for University of Minnesota Duluth, 10 goals, 12 assists. And the cool thing about this production, too, is that he's not necessarily a merchant in any way. He's not, just banging home rebounds. He's not getting secondary assists. He's getting these points. He's accumulating these points in a lot of different ways. He's creating points off the rush. He's scoring goals, beating goalies clean. He's being the primary setup man on some of these plays. So he's finding a lot of different ways to have an impact, and he is having a tangible impact in the form of goals. He's a former second-round pick. And again, he's kind of another one of those pieces that it's like, oh my gosh, the Red Wings have all these guys coming all of a sudden, almost all at once. Just like Augustine's going to be an interesting player to keep an eye on come contract time. I think Plantz is definitely playing himself into consideration right now. And I know it's still very early, but what he's doing right now, I couldn't tell you the last time the Red Wings had a collegiate prospect that performed at this level. It's astonishing, honestly. And then just to kind of finish out who I highlighted in that article, Eddie Gemborg, who I likened to the Punisher back in when he was drafted. He is succeeding over in Sweden's top league, which is arguably the second best hockey league in the world. Genborg plays a very physical, very demanding style of hockey. He I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being kind of like a Thomas Holmstrom type in the NHL level, where he kind of just needs to stand his ground. He's going to take some punishment, but he's going to be there to bang home rebounds and create space for more skilled line mates. He's on the top line for his Swedish team right now, and he's accumulated 13 points in 18 games by kind of just being the motor on that line. The other guys are more the scorers, and he's kind of just banging and crashing and creating space, and then the puck goes off of him, or he's there to bang home a rebound, or he just kind of gets his puck or gets the puck to his line mates. He's a smart player, and he kind of knows how he's built. He knows how to use his frame to his advantage. He was an exciting player when the Reds drafted him this past summer, and to see him already kind of translating it over in Sweden is it just kind of is furthering his stock even more. So like we've kind of been talking about, there's all this young talent on the NHL roster that is, we're all excited about it, and we should be. But you start to look just beyond the NHL roster. You look in the AHL, you look in the NCAA, you look in the European leagues, and it's like, how are they going to have roster spots for all these guys? Because there's all of a sudden a lot of talent that's just really exciting. And I know that, I'm a prospect guy, so maybe go figure, I'm excited by all these guys. And it's more likely that a lot of them aren't going to be who they look like they are today. But man, if there's anything that this year seems to be kind of proving, it's that the Red Wings scouting department seems to know what they're doing.
We're going to have to check in on a lot of these things. This is one of the reasons that I like that we've kind of flip the format a little bit so that we can cover the Wings throughout the season, because I think this is going to be a fun season from both the prospect side and the main roster side. They're starting off well. They've got all these guys coming. I've got a lot of notes already for our next interview when we check in with you, because you're talking about kind of the right sizing of the roster and, okay, what do we do? Do we trade away a goalie? You mentioned that in your article to maybe clear room for Kosa and Augustine and some of the other guys eventually. I think we need to follow Rookie Mania, brother, here and for next time. And also, this is a very random thought to leave you with, but has anyone thought, I know I get stuck on the 3-letter people because I like that with ASP and JVR and all these guys, but has anybody thought to attach a snake nickname to Sandin Pellikka? Because I think that could get some legs or lack thereof.
You know what? If you start the chant, I'll join in on it. I think that's a good idea.
I feel like then we're going past the acronym part, and then we're going to the ASP part, and then he's the snake. So I think that's got some. We'll work on that. We'll workshop that in between the interviews here. But appreciate you joining us. Always great stuff. Always fun. Always informational. Be sure to tell people where to follow you on social media, the writing, and the podcast here.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again for having me on. Always fun to talk puck with you. If you're looking to follow me, be sure to follow me over on pretty much any social media channel at Hockey with Devin. Be sure to check out my writing over at the Hockey Writers. I have an article coming out tomorrow, as a matter of fact, looking at the Red Wings' third pairing. And then, yes, as you mentioned as well, be sure to check out my podcast, the Flying Octopus podcast. Me and my co-stars there, I guess we'll call ourselves. Or my pod mates, we put on a good show, I believe, and looking forward to seeing some of you out there if you give us a follow.
Definitely follow them. All those guys put out great stuff, including Devin, and we'll look forward to having Devin and some of the other folks back on the show as the season progresses here. So thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to getting in touch with you here again soon.
For sure. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, Devin. Thanks to Devin Little. We'll talk to him later in the season. It's always good stuff, and the Red Wings are looking good with that young core here. But another team with a young core that's actually playing right now is the Pistons. Sean Murphy's about to join us here. He's chomping at the bit. He's messaging me. He's ready to get on because we're running a little bit behind with Devin Little. But we'll take a quick break and bring on Sean Murphy of the From Half Court Pod. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest. He's been chomping at the bit, and we're chomping at the bit to get him on here, especially since I think it's halftime. He's probably following the game. We want a game update from him. But first, Sean Murphy of the From Half Court Pod, we're celebrating National Vanilla Cupcake Day. So I've actually gotten an affirmative answer to this question. so far, but do you like cupcakes? And if so, what flavor would you choose?
I mean, Ryan, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Just like I can never turn down an opportunity to come on the show, I'll never turn down the opportunity to eat a cupcake. I mean, whether it's vanilla, whether it's chocolate, I am in a great mood. I think chocolate cupcakes might have a higher ceiling, but I think vanilla cupcakes are more consistently delicious. That might be a more overly thought out answer than you were expecting for, but that's what I'm here for, my friend.
I love it. That is what you're here for, and I love the answer. Now, I can't put you on the spot with this, but now that with the analysis you gave, you always give great analysis. I want to now compare the cupcakes to rising stars in the Pistons organization. You know, who's we got to work on that. That's maybe for a next interview here, because yeah, there's a lot of good stuff going on there. I know the game's going on. I'll have to watch the game tomorrow here and catch up on it because I've obviously been on air, but I'm curious about your thoughts on the game. And one of the notes that I had for our interview, it's even changed more. I wrote this down while I was watching the last game against the 76ers, and it's amazing to me that we've seen this happen with the Lions, and now it's kind of happening with the Pistons. It's like they're 8-2, as you pointed out in a recent tweet, and how they're at the top of the Eastern Conference and they're rolling along. But it's amazing that they lost Ivy at the beginning before the season here. We haven't even seen him yet, and we keep losing different pieces, but they're kind of going with the next man up mentality. And I wrote down that the starting lineup was Cade, Duncan Robinson, Thompson, Holland, and Duren the last game, and then they only had 25 bench minutes in that game, which was kind of amazing to me. And it was a combination of LeVert, Green, Reed, and I think Klintman got out there for a short time. Whereas this game, now there's no Thompson. You've got Green in the starting lineup, I saw in the box score, but they're just continuing to roll on. And you could say, okay, well, these aren't the strongest teams that they're playing against, and the 76ers didn't have Embiid, and now they're playing the Wizards. But this is still impressive that they're doing this with these depth pieces that have already given them early returns here.
Yeah, I think the most important, or like the most impressive thing about the season thus far, to your point, is no matter the context, like no matter what's presented in front of them, they're getting the job done, which is something that you couldn't really have said about the Pistons over the last few years. I mean, last year we saw them really grow up and learn what it means to win a game, but now, like, I think you really see Cade Cunningham truly understands when he needs to put his imprint on the game, when he needs to be more of a playmaking, point guard and facilitator, when he needs to, put the foot on the gas and score the basketball. The thing that's been, just incredibly impressive, to your point, has just been, the identity of this team pretty much, showed that it just carried over almost immediately. And then now they're on like a 5, coming up on a possibly 6-game winning streak. And the signs of truly great cultures are when you can plug and play around your key stars. That's really when teams can be dangerous. And when you have players like Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren playing at the level that they've been playing, it doesn't matter who's on the other side. There's not a whole lot of teams who can match that on both sides of the court when it comes to the physicality, their two-man game, just all the different things that they're bringing to the table. So this is the best Pistons basketball I've seen played since I was 8 years old. And that's saying something. That
is, and how cohesive they've been, especially the two you mentioned. But I've got the box score up right now. One of the things that stuck out to me right away was I didn't see the advanced stats. I just saw points, rebounds, and assists. Now I'm in the rest of it. And Cade, like you said, he knows he's got to be aggressive with this game. He's always the primary offensive guy, but he does try to set everybody up. You're lacking a lot of your secondary scorers other than Duren, and he took, it looks like, I don't know if he took a shot or two in the second half since it started, but 23 shots in the first half. That's very high for Cade. Yep. So he's clearly being aggressive, and it led to 21 points. He's clearly setting the tone there. But I cannot believe this this lineup that they have, not only the starting lineup, but the bench players that have played and the bench players that haven't played yet. I mean, we're down into you've got to know the Motor City Cruise roster. You've got to know the acquisitions here to even know these guys at the back end of the bench and that have even gotten in the lineup here.
Yeah, those sprained ankles are definitely starting to show itself, and that second night of a back-to-back is a very real thing. And this would have been enough to cripple the Pistons in the past and prevent them from even being competitive in these types of games. And, it's still going to be close. It's looking like Washington kind of closed the gap here to start the third quarter, and it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. But the thing that's been impressive about the Pistons is even when they have gotten punched in the mouth in some of these games, they've weathered the storm and, essentially took their best punches, and then they just came out swinging themselves. Obviously, it's tough when you don't have an Asar Thompson out there on top of an Isaiah Stewart, on top of a Tobias Harris, on top of a Jaden Ivey, not to mention the fact that Marcus Sasser hasn't even really played his first minutes of the season yet. They don't even have Karis LeVert, who, was kind of missed some of the season for them. So, it's definitely like the amount of injuries, that they've dealt with at the beginning of the season is definitely stark, but it speaks a lot to how much of a superstar Cade Cunningham is, that they're still 8-2 and it doesn't even matter.
Exactly. And there's a few themes that I thought we'd be talking about. One is the search for, we've talked before about kind of the four and how that was going to go. Obviously, we haven't seen kind of the full plan there because of the injuries. Harris got hurt, and then we didn't necessarily know what we were going to see behind that. Holland's now gotten a start there. There's different players that they've started there. They went with the double bigs with Stu and Duren, which I remember you being involved in this discussion on X, Sean, because it was like there was a period of the Pistons' growth here in the last couple of years that it was like you had to choose Stewart or Duren. I'd like to choose both and have them both on the team because they both add something to the team. And I think you've made a similar point. It's like, okay, well, both these guys are good. They do something a little bit different, but this is Duren's breakout year so far. All of the injuries have definitely showcased Cade, which is no surprise, which he was going to be showcased either way. But Duren has really been the revelation through this injury period here.
Duren's been unbelievable. I mean, when I posted a tweet the other day of legitimately, it was just a side-by-side photo with, on one side it was Jalen Duren and on the other side it was Dwight Howard. And really the point I was making was not even as much like the way that he plays the game, but just like how physically imposing and athletically dominant he looks. Like, there's really only one game on the schedule thus far where I can say I feel like Biggs have really matched his intensity and athleticism, and that's Cleveland. Like, just about every single other night, there have not been guys who have been able to keep up with what he's been able to do. And I think, the big secret is he's just been a lot more aggressive on the offensive end. Like, JB talked about how they've wanted him to be more aggressive, to take more opportunities, to, be more active, looking for, his shots at the rim. And, especially just, I think the fact that for a guy like Jalen Duren, this is the first time that he's had the same coach 2 years in a row. So not having to learn a new system, knowing exactly where they expect you to be, all those different things, that makes a massive difference. So I think that's one of the, a lot of the big reasons why you're seeing him do so well. And to your point, now that Isaiah Stewart has even gotten better with his, with his 3-point shot, and now that, he's continuing to be as dominant of a rim protector as he is, and how much those two just really complement each other in the way that they play the game, there's a lot of reason to believe that, you're just going to find nothing but success if you see those two together. And one thing that you're seeing, throughout the league is a lot of the teams, especially the good teams, have at least one double big lineup that they can point to and, and pull out if necessary. And I would argue that Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart together is one of the better double big lineup combinations that you can have. So the fact that those two are playing the best that they've ever played is just scary for opposing teams.
and really haven't gotten an opportunity to play together that much. I think they would have if not for the injuries and what's going on with the team. But I totally agree with you, because there was clearly a trend away from, we're not going to have the back to the basket centers. We're not going to have double big lineups. We're going to have more athletic 1 through 4. Everybody's got to be able to shoot. You can maybe have a 5 that doesn't shoot the 3, but they've got to have switchability. And now I've liked the recent sea change. That was like the last change, and now there are a lot more double big lineups. You talked about Cleveland; they're kind of one of the more prominent ones. But I'm with you on this Detroit double big, because one of the things that I wasn't sure if they had on the roster, because I didn't know they were going to play Stewart the way they have at the 4, I said, okay, well, what do we do when Harris is off the floor? Who's the 4? Does Thompson go 2-4? Are they going to play Holland there? Because that was what a lot of the depth charts were looking like, but I wasn't really sure if that's where he slotted in. But I like the fact that depending on what the roster is on the other side, what the lineup is on the other side, that they can put Stu in there against certain formats. And like you said, he's a switchable big. He's shooting the 3 better. He's doing a lot of things well. And I think that's one of the big highlights with Duren, is that we tend to make people one thing. That's been one of the themes of the show so far, other than cupcakes apparently. But there's been we've been talking about how we can only see one thing, and when you see Duren, you see strength and you see power. But he's got a nice handle for a big guy. He's a good passer as a big guy, and those skills are getting an opportunity to flower and develop because of the role he's been put in. And now when you're searching for that number 2 guy next to Cunningham, where you thought it was maybe going to be Ivy or Thompson grows into that, now Duren's saying, hey, why can't it be me?
Yeah, exactly. And, a lot of people are kind of, have been asking me about the fact, like, oh, should Detroit have, should they have signed him in the offseason? Did they make a mistake by not locking him up when they could have? And I understand why people feel that way, especially, because you look at the way the Lions do things, and Brad Holmes and their philosophy is to lock up guys early when you can. I would say that if you look at some of the previous production from Jalen Duren, the reports, suggest that he wanted north of $30 million a year. And if you look at some of the ways that he's played in the past, he just wasn't worth that off of previous production. Whereas now he's literally up almost double his almost double his point average. So there's a very significant difference when it comes to the level that we're seeing, from him now versus where we were even a year ago. So, and on top of that, quite frankly, as a player who Jalen Duren has come out before and admitted that there were times where he felt like he was playing soft, I don't think it's bad for them to have the motivation of a contract. And if he continues to play at this level, you'll be glad to sign him to whatever number you can, because when a player's truly that good, no matter what the number is, it always feels like a steal.
Especially because in the modern day here, if you can draft a guy and then lock him in, that's a lot different math than trying to sign him in free agency. Yep. And so, yeah, I like being able to see him, but yeah, I like that he's elevating. He's still a very young guy. I think his stature and his general look, we just attribute him to being an older guy, but he's just not by age. He just he's massive, and he's got an older looking face. So he looks a little bit older and more mature, and he plays strong now, so we're giving that to him. But yeah, go ahead, Sean.
He turns 22 in a week and a half.
Exactly. He's just barely old enough to drink a beer, let alone play in the big leagues here and all that. So yeah, he's
can't
been
even run a car.
That's true. And he's probably he could still be on his parents' insurance plan here too, if he wanted to be. I don't know why he would need to be. I guess he's getting paid good enough probably to be off of it. But yeah, there's so many things. It's amazing. So it's fun to see him so far. I want to take a quick break. Sean's given us great stuff so far, but the Pistons have fallen. They've lost their lead a little bit. So I think the fact that we pulled Sean away from the game is making the Pistons not play quite as well. So we got to give them a little break. We got to make sure they add a few points in the break, and we'll be right back here with Sean Murphy. He's given us great stuff so far, and we'll talk to him a little bit more about this 8-2 start. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with friend of the show, Sean Murphy, giving us great stuff on the Pistons so far. I'm curious what we've done a good job talking about Duran and Cade so far, but they have had a lot of these other guys that have been role players that have filled in. I just don't think we would have, if you would have said, okay, they're going to be, by this point in the season, they're going to be without Stewart and they're going to be without Ivy, and he wouldn't have played a game yet, and Thompson's out and Harris is out. If you would have said that guys like Javonte Green and Paul Reed and Lanier's been getting a lot of minutes in this particular game, Robinson hasn't hit full form, but he's played fairly well. It's just interesting to see this team gel so well, but I'm curious who else has stuck out to you other than Cade and Duran, who are kind of the obvious two starters here that have excelled with this injury kind of cobbled together roster here.
Right. I would say for me, like one of the guys that's been really impressive thus far is just the year two leap for Ron Holland has been very real. Just specifically with the pressure that he can provide on the ball as a defender. You know, he already brought a lot of energy and intensity on that side last season, but now he can bring some of the IQ and the smarts alongside it. And then on top of that, he's just gotten better as a finisher, you know, at the rim. He's more confident as an offensive player. You know, he just, and when him and Asar Thompson are on the court together, it is literal havoc for offenses. They break plays. They disrupt whatever actions these teams are trying to run. So those two in conjunction are just an incredibly fascinating wing pair that when I think of postseason basketball, I think those are two guys that are going to give coaches and players alike just a lot of fit and, you know, cause them to stay up a little bit later at night because they have to game plan and accommodate for them. And to your point, like with Duncan Robinson and Karis LeVert, like Duncan, you know, a little bit more so has been available and has been able to kind of get acclimated in his role. And it hasn't always looked perfect, but he's hitting shots at a consistent enough level. He's actually having moments where he's looking pretty decent on the defensive end. There's definitely times where you can tell that he's being targeted on the defensive side of the ball, but overall, especially for the fact that you're going to have a hard time replacing one of the greatest shooting seasons in the history of the league. I think he's done a really good job with that. On the other side of things, Karis LeVert, he's kind of been working his way back into the lineup, kind of, you know, starting the season with a little bit of an injury, not being 100%, coming out of training camp, kind of has some knee soreness and is out in tonight's game. But even without, you know, kind of the offensive input or output that he might be used to in previous spots in his career, he's still playing really hard on the defensive side of the ball. He's still giving them, you know, like really high level play for what he's being asked to do. So I think it's just incredibly impressive, especially when, you know, there are a lot of other teams like Atlanta, like Orlando that, you know, kind of had, you know, more flashy summers, if you will, than the Pistons did. But I think just that culture that they have in place is really just allowing these new guys to come in, and they know exactly how they need to fit in. They know exactly what's being expected of them. And as a result, I think you're seeing them succeed because of it.
There were a lot of great points in there, but the last one is the one that really stuck out to me because we talked about this in the context of the Durant trade to the Rockets. You mentioned the teams in the East, obviously, but that Rockets trade was a big flashy trade, and we'll see what happens. They're a good young team too, and that's a good addition. But I like this team building strategy. If you've got a young core that you feel like you can develop and not taking the big swing quite yet, not messing with the culture too much, I just think that goes awry more often than you'd think. And it's more of like a public perception thing where the fans want that and it's a win now strategy, but this is a more sustainable strategy to your point of signing Duran and locking him up to go with some of the other pieces that you already have on. I remember when we thought the Stewart contract, well, not us two, I don't think, but when some of the public perception was that the Stewart contract was a bad contract. Now that's looking very good with the cap changing and with him developing his skill set. That's going to be a total bargain by the end of his deal. And then you add Duran in, maybe Ivy gets in the mix. You got Thompson, you got Holland, you got some other people coming, and we'll see, you know, what those contracts end up looking like. But you've got the pieces on the team where you just build around this and layer in veterans, and you can really foresee this being a championship level team at this point with the young core and layering guys in. I wanted to make a comparison too, because you were talking about Holland and Thompson, and I feel like they are kind of given that same duality that Duren and Stewart are, that like, okay, well, you can't play them on the court at the same time, and they have different skill sets, and you got to choose one or the other. And I think you made the best point, which is how I see it too, because there is some, I do see, it's like when Duren was coming up, you have his physical build. I know people were saying, well, if you combine that with Stewart's effort level, you'd have this cyborg type player. It's like, but that's not how it works. If you have that physical presence, you don't necessarily develop those other skills. It's the same with Holland and Thompson, but they do go together well, and they're clearly raising up their skill sets. And that pressure, like you said, that Holland, because he's the Stewart, he's the one with the pressure, he's the effort guy. Thompson's a little smoother. He's got a great athletic build, great skill set, but they pair well together, just like we're seeing with Stewart and Duren.
Yeah, and with all this talk about the importance of the three-point shot, how the game is getting increasingly more offensive heavy, like I think like one of the things that you have to look at about this Pistons team is the way that they're winning games is by scoring points in the paint and defending at a high level. Like they're number one in the league at points in the paint, and they're third in the league in defensive rating. So, like, when you talk about, like, yes, don't get me wrong, like, you need to be able to space the floor. You need to be able to score, in half-court offense and to be able to have guys that you can consistently rely on, to get you offense. But at the same time, like, the Pistons are doing it the way that they've always done it when they've been successful. It's just they're doing it with, like, a new, like, modern-day mold and twist. And I think one of the things that's, like, really beneficial about the way that they're playing and, just one of the beneficial things about the tactic and like the approach that Trajan took is he probably could have made a trade this summer, kind of like what Orlando did, and gone out and taken like a good guess at like what they need to take another step. But Orlando kind of had a weird year last year. So it's not even necessarily like their trajectory was like on a continual upswing. Now they're 4-6. There's questions about their coach. And like what they're going to be doing going forward there. Whereas now, like if you're the Pistons, like they're being talked about as, like a potential buyer down the road, as like someone can, a team that can go and get someone, in the market. And one of the names that I heard today that I just keep throwing around as someone that could bring some real offensive scoring power, someone that could also like really fits the defensive mold, someone who's from Michigan and gets the identity of what this team's trying to be. Could you imagine if they somehow are able to get Jaren Jackson Jr. and still keep Duren and Stewart?
That would be amazing. I was wondering where you're going with that. I've tried to think about what would be a good pairing with those two when we weren't sure what that would look like with them with them on the floor at the same time. That's looked better this year, but you still need a rotation. You need a big man rotation to go with those two guys, and ideally a third guy that is also a flexible big 4 or 5 in that Jaren Jackson Jr. mold, and that would look amazing. And obviously the Grizzlies are in a little bit of an uncomfortable spot. I don't know what's happening with Morant, and they changed the coach, and that doesn't seem to have helped in the early going. And so you've got a problem there. I could see two things. I could see Jackson wanting to go to a Pistons team that's a young team on the rise and wanting out of Memphis at the same time. So that would be amazing. I don't know do you have an idea of what you would think package wise they would have to put together? Because that's obviously the idea is cost wise. What are you giving up? I'm okay with giving up future picks because if that's your swing, to me, that's a pretty good swing. But as far as players on the team and putting contracts together, I know the contract package always ends up being a combination of like Harris and Ivy because that works for a lot of these contracts. But I'm curious what you see with that.
Yeah, so I think this is one of those situations where, and whenever people hear me talk about this, I always like to make clear that this isn't me saying that I think the Pistons should trade Jaden Ivey or they should ship him out. But when you just look at the nature of the roster, he's the most natural centerpiece of a trade. Kind of think of like Josh Giddey in Oklahoma City, where he's a really good player, a solid young prospect, but he just might not be what this team needs right now. And so, like, when looking at, like, situations where it would make sense. I mean, one thing about John Morant is his mom spent time in Memphis on the coaching staff. One of his role models is John Morant. And if Memphis is indeed looking to move off of John Morant, which what they're going to find out is that they're probably not going to be getting the trade market that they're going to be hoping for. They're going to probably have to move off of a Jaren Jackson Jr. in order to truly rebuild in the way that they would want to and get assets. So I think, anything around like Jaden Ivey, Tobias Harris, just like you said, because of the salaries, I wouldn't be surprised if they asked for like a Chaz Lanier or just like another kind of like fringe young player who's at least kind of like a prospect on a cheap salary, and then it would probably be some picks. But it's interesting with Jaren Jackson Jr. because he's had some health issues, there's kind of like some inconsistency pieces, but he's also won Defensive Player of the Year before, right? So it's like this is someone where, I know it might sound like a logjam at the big position, but this is someone who can stretch the floor, someone who has like some real scoring capabilities. When I just think of like the ways that you could just really lean into the way that this Pistons team is thriving and just make things really uncomfortable for opposing defenses, he would just be a real problem for other teams if you had him, Cade, and Duren on the court together. Like, how do you deal with that?
I totally agree, and you're getting a double big lineup that you can't really play off the floor at that point. You've got either Jackson and Duren or Stewart and Jackson, and you can't play those guys off the floor. You can't find the weakness and take advantage of the lack of switchability or stretching to the 3-point line or whatever it is. So that'll be interesting. We'll definitely be having you back on to follow up throughout the season. So we'll have to have you back on probably before then for sure, but around the trade deadline and at different points in the season and check in. But I got to send you back to the game because I see the lead is going up here from the Wizards. So we got to get you back to the game so you can salvage the fourth quarter for us. But we appreciate you joining the show, and be sure to tell people where they can follow you to get more of this great coverage here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Ryan. People can follow me on Twitter at Sean Halfcourt, but also check out the podcast on YouTube from Halfcourt. We actually did an episode right before the Wizards game, so if you're looking for an up-to-date episode, we have one right there. But on top of that, I'm also doing more writing this season on Substack at From Half Court. It's entirely free to follow and subscribe, so if you want to follow that too, that'd be great. But Ryan, thanks as much again for having me.
Definitely. We'll have you on again soon, and be sure to follow all those things from Sean because it's great stuff, and we'll look forward to having you on again soon here, Sean.
Sounds great, my friend. You take care. Get a cupcake after the show for me.
Will do. Thanks, Sean. Talk to you later. Thanks, Sean Murphy. Great stuff from him. We'll take a quick break here and close up the show after the break. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We appreciate you joining us. Everybody had a favorite cupcake. I was happy about that. We appreciate AA Ron keeping us on track here and getting in the mix in the first segment. Great stuff there about football. He'll be back next week on this show with one of the sponsors, actually. Dr. Williams of Williams Chiropractic will be on. We were talking about him in the break. Want to thank all the rest of the sponsors. Jim Haglund of JH Realty, Encore Business Group, Rydan Investments, Grand Management Group, Calder Financial, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Collectible Insurance Services, and Mary Freebed. Appreciate all their support. Appreciate the great information we got from all of the guests, Chris Solari, Devin Little, and Sean Murphy. We're looking forward to doing the second episode of Shane Graham's Extra Points with Ryan Walsh on Thursday here. Shane will be in studio as far as I know, and so it'll be our first time in the studio. We'll have a lot of things to talk about there. We'll be talking a lot of football, so if you were missing the football coverage, be sure to tune into us on that show, but be sure to tune into the Sports Project from 7 to 9 on Wednesday with our other host, Steve Project, and then 10 to 12 on Saturday morning, and then be sure to tune into us next week from 7 to 9 on Monday, and then obviously hit Shane Graham's Extra Points here 7 to 9 on Thursday. We got a busy sports lineup developing on Jethro here, so that's fun for the station as a whole. Dave Conrad's doing well. We want to keep updating that, continuing to do well in his recovery. Hopefully we'll see him back soon. And yeah, other than that, have a great week. We'll talk to you on Thursday if you follow that show. If you missed anything, be sure to tune in to the podcast feed, YouTube, what have you. And until next week, stay informed, stay vigilant, and have a great week.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.